Okay, I'll just check. Okay, Manjil, I think we can begin our webinar now.
Yes.
The introductory part. Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
I think around 183 participants have joined. Yeah. 184 participants I see right now. So I'd like to welcome all the participants to this webinar, and we are very lucky to have with us Professor B. Suri, who is from ISI Bangalore, and we are very happy that he has agreed to devote his time for our webinar. So his topic is he will be speaking on mathematical puzzles as an aid to introducing mathematical notions. So on behalf of the organizing team, that is the Department of Mathematics, GC College Silchar, and Assam Academy of Mathematics Kachar District Branch, and Gonitsora.com, I would like to welcome Professor Suri to our webinar, and we will be looking forward for a very interesting session by Professor Suri. So our moderator for today's webinar is Manjil Saikia, who is a postdoctoral researcher at Cardiff University, UK. I would like to request him to say a few words.
Thank you, Devasis. First of all, welcome everyone to the webinar. So we are very pleased and honored that we have Professor Suri from Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore with us today. Very briefly, I would like to say one or two lines about Gonitsora. So probably all of you have visited the website because you have to go there to register. So we'd be very happy if you give some feedback and suggestion on how to improve our website. And we encourage all the students to look at the materials that we have. So we have been doing this for about 10 years now. And without further delay, I would like to request Devasis to start the introduction and then go forward with that.
Yeah. Thank you, Manzil. Okay. Now I would like to read out a brief biodata of our speaker for today. I'd like to share this screen here. Yeah. I think it's visible. Yeah. So once again, I would like to welcome Professor B. Suri.
It's not full
On
screen, Devasis.
Oh, is it not full screen? Just let me just check. Mm, just this full screen thing creates trouble every time. Yeah, just now let me check it. Okay. Is it in full screen now?
No, but you can go ahead.
Or
It's okay.
the slides are visible, right?
Yeah, it's visible. Only the bottom part is not visible.
Okay, okay. Okay, I think this full screen thing creates problems. So Professor B. Suri is a professor in StatMath unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Bangalore. He is brilliant in academics and excellent in research. He is the national coordinator in charge of Mathematics Olympiad program in India. Professor Suri completed his BSc Mathematics honors from Hansraj College, Delhi University in 1979, and MSc Mathematics from IIT Delhi in 1981. Thereafter, he obtained PhD in Mathematics from TIFR Mumbai, and he joined ISI Bangalore in 1999. Professor Suri works on algebraic groups over global and local fields, combinatorial methods in group theory and number theory, Diophantine equations and division algebras, algebraic number theory, and K theory. His homepage is a repository of numerous articles and mathematical resources. So I'd like to request everyone to have a look at his homepage. There are lots of resources available, which everyone will find important and interesting. So without further delay, I would like to request Professor Suri to kindly begin his talk. And just uh, just 1 minute, I'd like to request Manjil to just say a few things to the participants about muting the audio and all, and then request Professor Suri to continue.
Themselves. So after the talk is over, I can allow the participants to unmute themselves. So if there are any questions, then please feel free to write them in the chat, and I'll put it to Professor Suri after the end of this talk.
Manjil, you can also announce that it's live on Facebook as well. So those who are having problem, they can have a look
Yes,
at the Facebook.
that is right. Yes. So if by chance you have to leave the meeting because of some technical issue, then please go to our Facebook page, and the video will be live there. Just write an email to Debasi Sharmi if something happens, and we'll take that into consideration. So, Professor Suri, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. It is thank you for the really overwhelming kind of invitation. It would have been much simpler. Anyway, first of all, I would like to say that my heart goes out to the people, large number of people who have been affected by the floods. I hope things return to normal very soon. I'm of course very happy to address the Ahom people here. Among other people, Ahom is one of my favorite people. Some of my best friends have been from Assam. Of course, my thanks go to Dr. Debashish Sharma and Dr. Manjil Saikia, also to Gurucharan College and the Assam Academy of Mathematics, and Gonit Sura, of which I think Dr. Manjil Saikia has been so active, in which I don't have to say much about it. People probably know better than I do. As far as this topic is concerned, my topic of this talk is concerned. First, I was told that there are lots of some high school students, some college students, some PhD students. So there is a huge spectrum. So what is the best common denominator? So I decided to speak on mathematics, which is at high school level. The mathematics required is high school level, but I hope to keep everyone interested throughout. The level is, of course, high school or maybe beginning college. And I want to say that I'm not going to discuss any Olympiad type of problems, because that is only for a certain section of people. And another thing is this kind of talk, where it's a popular talk in some sense, their best way is ideally they're interactive, where I can see the participants' faces, I can see the expressions. Usually, I don't decide beforehand. I have some amount of matter with me, but I ask questions, and looking at this responses, I go ahead. Really not possible in this case. So I have to make do with the platform that is available here. On the other hand, what I have done is in my file, which I'm going to present here, quite a large number of games and puzzles and problems are there. And if I were to discuss all of them in detail, to do justice to that, I would require at least 3 or 4 lectures, I think. So what I'll do is I'll just select a few of them and discuss them in detail. For the other ones, I might give some hints for solutions or mention what kind of mathematics is involved there, and leave it at that, because my file can be shared with people. It will have mostly all the solutions of all the problems mentioned. So don't get overwhelmed by the number of problems that I mentioned in my file. Not all of them we might have time to discuss. Okay, so thanks once again, and let me start. I'm going to share this file. Let's see whether it works properly. Is it visible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So how do I don't want to show my face, but I want to show only the file. Okay, let it be. So I slightly changed the title, as you can see. I called it Mathematics Fun and Games, which I guess a lot of you people might agree with. And this is the kind of audience which will agree with this kind of statement. I want to tell you a small story about when you meet people in public, what happens when you tell them you're a mathematician or you do mathematics. Usually they say, oh my God, it's mathematics. I can't do any mathematics. I'm very bad at mathematics. I was very poor. I got 0, this and that. So often what happens, we feel somewhat glad that, okay, we are doing mathematics. These people don't understand mathematics, we do. Whereas what is meant is, it is opposite meaning. The person is saying that, I am so successful and I can do whatever I wish. I'm being successful in life in general, and I don't need this mathematics. So that is the kind of attitude. So don't feel happy when someone says, I'm very bad at mathematics. That's what I realized after many years. So now I try to communicate some mathematics to various people. Not everyone is made for mathematics, but everybody needs some mathematics. At least let me make this fun and games kind of. I hope you can hear clearly. Manjul, Debashish?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. I just wanted to say once.
Yes, sir. It's audible.
Okay, let me go ahead. So first, here is a picture of, normally I would ask who this is, and a lot of people would answer. But now I would just wait for a few seconds and then tell the answer myself. This person's name is Paul Erdős, who is a very sort of peripatetic mathematician. He used to travel around the world and prove lots of theorems. And here is his friend. His friend's name is Alfred Renyi, who is also a very well-known mathematician. See what he says. If I feel unhappy, I do mathematics to become happy. If I am happy, I do mathematics to keep happy. So, you just keep doing mathematics. Now, why is Renyi important here is the next statement. So here is a statement. I hope you can read it. This essentially means a mathematician is a machine that transforms coffee into theorems. Okay, so this is a statement credited to Paul Erdős, but it's actually due to Renyi, his friend Renyi. And this has a second meaning. This is supposed to be a pun on these words. The word Zatz, or Bodensatz, means coffee sediment which is left over. So the coffee, that is a pun on the word coffee and coffee sediment. Theorems and coffee sediment are punned here. So let me go ahead. I hope you're woken up now. So I'll start. Let me start with a simple problem. So this is again for anybody from middle school to high school to anybody. take a rectangular grid made of unit squares. For example, let me take a rectangle of 9 by 6 units. We draw a diagonal, say from the left. I'm going to show a picture, but just imagine, draw a diagonal from the left upper corner to the lower right corner. We just have to see how many unit squares this diagonal passes through. Okay, here is a picture. So you can here count easily, and you might find it is 12 if I had drawn it perfectly. 12 squares that it intersects. Okay, this diagonal. It's a 9 cross 6 square, or whatever, 6 cross 9 square rectangle. Now, if there is a bigger rectangle, say 42 cross 18, or a general m cross n, in n cross n we got 12. For 42 cross 8, we'll see that I've written a wrong answer here. Actually, somebody should correct that answer. 42 cross 18, how much will you get? It is not 53. Typing mistake. I'll leave you a few seconds to guess what the correct number is. In fact, I would like you to guess what is the general number. What is to be guessed? For an m cross n rectangle, draw a diagonal. How many unit squares does it pass through? Normally, when I give it in a talk, live talk, people give lots of answers, and most of them are wrong. In fact, all of them are wrong usually. For a general m cross n, that is. So let me just tell you the answer, because there is no scope for waiting for people to answer. This is the number. The answer is m plus n minus GCD of m and n. Okay, so that 42 cross 18 should have been, I guess, 54, right? I guess, yeah, not 53. Okay, so let me see. Can we see why it is this number? So oftentimes we have to think in the right direction. There are many ways of thinking. So if you think in some, you can, of course, you write the equations of the vertical lines, horizontal lines, and see the points of intersection and solve it in a long manner. But let me tell you how common sense can give you solutions. I guess some of you might think of this. So here is a diagonal, and from the left side to the right side, it is hitting many vertical lines. How many vertical lines is it hitting? In an m cross n rectangle, it will hit n vertical lines to the right of the leftmost line. Similarly, m horizontal lines. So in other words, the number should be m plus n. Number of squares it meets should be m plus n, because you just have to count number of vertical and number of horizontal lines it intersects. But you see what's happening? You're double counting, because when you're hitting a vertical line, you might also be hitting a horizontal line. For example, here and here. So when are you hitting vertical and a horizontal line at the same time? When m and n have a common factor. So that is the number of double counts we are doing. So the answer is this. Okay, so here is so you might say it's curious way of producing the GCD of two numbers geometrically. Let me again tell you. Just now we saw GCD, how it's calculated geometrically. Here is one more example of this sort of friendship between geometry and numbers. So look at an m cross n rectangle filled as follows. You're going to fill it with numbers. Start with the left top corner. I'm going to show a picture, but first read this. Start with the left top corner and start filling the digits 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. diagonally downwards. Okay, until you hit an edge. What happens when you hit an edge of the rectangle? You fold the rectangle and continue. What does it mean? For example, let me show it for 4 cross 5. It looks like the following. 4 cross 5. I start with 1 in the corner, then diagonally 2, 3, 4. When I come here, it is 5. You can fold the rectangle, 5 is here. 6 comes here, which is here. Then 6, 7, 8, 9 again goes here, etc. 9, 10, 11 goes here, 12, 13. So you're folding the rectangle from all sides, like a torus. So this is, you've got all the numbers 1 to 20 lined up here. What do you notice about this? Just stare at it for a few seconds. You notice something about this. Okay. You notice the following thing. Not only have you filled, first of all, there is no guarantee that you fill every square in this rectangle, but it is guaranteed actually. And what you have is, this is the unique integer, which leaves the remainder I when you divide by m, and leaves the remainder j when you divide by n. That is the ijth entry. You notice this. See, for example, 18, the 2 3th entry, so it leaves the remainder of 2 when you divide by 4, there's a 4 cross 5, and leaves the remainder of 3 when you divide by 5. So it is 2 3th entries, this unique number. So what have we done now? By this process, you have proved, I'll mention this name, Sun Tzu theorem. Why do I call it Sun Tzu theorem? Because we have been told that we don't use Chinese items. So this is so-called Chinese remainder theorem. So you can apply Chinese remainder theorem by doing this geometric way of doing it. Okay, let me go to another kind of problem. Again, take a thin rectangular piece of paper. I'll show a picture again. So you make a very simple knot. You make a knot without crumpling or tearing the paper. Then after doing that knot, there is a flat structure. Just flatten it, and there will be some extra portions which you can snip away or fold away. I'll show you the picture. So what you have to know is what is the shape you get. You can guess first of all. If you do it, of course, you'll know what it is. Without doing it, can you guess? And every time I have asked for this, about 3/4 of the people have answered, given wrong answers. But people have guessed. Some people have guessed the correct answer. So this is how it is. Let's say we start with the rectangular piece of paper and make a simple knot, simple like a shoelace knot. Okay, do this and then pull it completely. So the extra portions there at the corners, you can snip them off. So what do you get? You get a regular pentagon. It's most amazing. Here is the simplest construction of a regular pentagon you can think of by folding. Of course, I can talk about other polygons also, but right now let me remain with this problem. Point is, this regular pentagon. Now, of course, you might say, okay, this kind of magic, I don't know, maybe there is some very high level of mathematics involved in proving it. Not at all. What is required is what is called 9th class geometry. Of course, nowadays in the 9th class, they may not teach this, but usual congruence of triangles, something about parallelogram. So I have given the proof here. I don't want to spend time on it. Here is the picture, and then I'll give you the proof. Since I'm going to discuss a large number of problems, I leave it with you with the proof here. Don't look at the proof until you try it yourself. But the proof is here in the file, which I'll flash it through once. As you can see, all the statements are about SSS and things like that. Okay. So please look at it later after you try it. You'll be convinced that it is just, and then you can try for heptagon and so on. Can you do anything? So I'm quickly passing to another problem now. So here is the problem about filling glasses with water. I mean, some transparent liquid is what I mean. So first of all, let me ask you a very, very simple thing which you might have heard in childhood. How do we know that we have filled a glass exactly half? Of course, your eyesight may be pretty good, but still exactly half, how do you see? There is a very, very simple way of saying it, provided, of course, the shape of the glass that you have is something very symmetric. This one. So if it is tilted like that, what happens? If it is, sorry, you can see when it is less than half, when it is more than half, when it is equal to half. Because this requires the glass to be symmetric. Anyway, so the problem that I'm going to talk about is not this. I'm going to talk about two glasses. Suppose you have two glasses. Here I assume that two glasses are there, and when you fill water in them, suppose they have equal levels, I should be able to say. I should be able to see with the naked eye. I don't have anything else to measure, but I should be able to see with the naked eye. That I'm assuming. So what is the problem that we are trying to look at? We are trying to look at what are the proportions which are fillable just using finite number of steps. And more interestingly is an algorithm. This is where the mathematics comes in. Algorithm will be simpler. It can be done. We can even find out which proportions can be filled and how to do it, how to give steps, etc. For example, let's say we can definitely fill 1/4 because you can just fill and then level. You have two glasses, you fill one of them and level it, have 1/2, empty one of them, then again level them, it becomes 1/8, like that, right? So I'll tell you here. follow the process. Fill left one, level both. Then fill left one, level both. Empty the right one, level both. So I'll just write as fill left, empty left. Sorry, empty level. L is for level. Just to explain, so what does it do? First you have, when you fill, you have left side is 1, right side is 0. Then you level, it becomes half. Then you fill the left one, it becomes 1/2. So the total amount of liquid is 3/2. So if level it becomes 3/4, 3/4. Then it becomes empty the left one, it becomes 0, 3/4. Then you level again 3/8, 3/8. So just by doing this process of filling, leveling, emptying in some order, you are able to get 3/8. So remember one thing, certain processes you don't need to do. It's a waste of time if you do level and level, because it's already leveled. Select projection operator, fill and fill. Of course, you already fill it. You don't have to fill. Similarly, empty and empty. Filling and empty is again waste of job, waste of time. Emptying and filling. So these are the strings we don't use. So we might use filling and leveling or emptying and leveling. So for example, note that we wanted the proportion 3/8 above. 3/8, right? 3 in binary notation is 1, 1. Binary notation. 1 in the unit place and 1 in the tooth place. Here 8 is 1 into 2 cube. So this is the binary expansion of 8. So when you look at 3/8, so of course 3/8 also can be written in binary notation. It is 0.011. You can see that 2 cube. It's like something by 10 cube. How do you do? Just remove the decimal place, right? So 3/8 becomes this. 3/8 is this. No, the process you saw was filling, leveling, emptying, leveling. So I'll see what that means. So reversing this idea, procedure can be read off from the binary expansion. 3/8 is this number. By reversing this number, what do you get? 110. And filling, leveling we call as 1, and emptying, leveling as 0. So we do filling, leveling, and emptying, leveling. These 3 steps. Why did I do it in the opposite direction? Because when you say filling and leveling, you are doing filling first. So it's in the opposite direction. It's like saying negate f times g in functions. Sometimes you might say g of f or f of g. That's why. So the sorry, upshot is, let's look at something like 47/64, whose decimal binary expansion, base 2 expansion looks like this. So what will be the procedure? You read from the right 111101, which gives FL, 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 EL, FL. Try to do this, you'll find that you'll get 47/64. And in the pot, actually, it is a glass, okay, pot or a glass. So you can see that we can prove a number of theorems here, actually. I didn't spend time on this later in this file, but you can do it. You can prove that in a finite number of steps, the proportions that you can fill have denominator power of 2, any power of 2. Those are the ones which you can fill. And now you can even give an algorithm to fill. Suppose I say, how do you fill 313/1024 portion of glass? Now you know how to do it. Just write 313/1024 as a base 2 expansion and then follow this algorithm. Okay, think about it later. I hope you understood what I said. I cannot see your faces, unfortunately, so I'll go to the next one. I'll jump. So here is another thing with a piece of paper. So again, take a rectangular piece of paper and make folds in the following way. First, fold the paper into half by bringing the bottom edge above, top bottom edge to the top, match to the top edge. I'll show you a picture again and keep doing this. To the folded paper, again, take the top half and fold onto the bottom half. Always coming to the top. Okay. And you do it number of times, let's say 10 times. And after you unfold it, what happens? You will see some crests and troughs. Okay, there will be some ridges and some valleys, ups and downs. You can see in the paper. Number of questions arise here. Let me show a picture first. We'll do only once and unwind. There is a valley here. There's a down here, which I call D for down. This is not a very good picture, but I just did it in a hurry. We do 2 folds and unfold. It becomes this. One down, and then followed by an up. Do it 3 times. you have down, down, up, down, down, up, up. So is there a pattern? First of all, the simplest question is, okay, I'll do it once more. 4 times I've folded and unfolded. This is the pattern. Down, down, up, down, down, up, up, down, down, down. Does it look like some periodic thing? First of all, easy question, what is the number of creases? This most people would guess, because you look at the recursive process, how many more lines are added at each step. The recursive process will tell you what is the recursion followed by that. It is same thing as when you do tower of Hanoi problem. So the number of creases turns out to be 2 to the power n minus 1, which I have not written down here. So when you fold it 4 times and unfold, you get 15 lines. Okay, now observing from the top to the bottom, what is the pattern of ups and downs? So for example, does a pattern of n plus 1 folds start with the earlier pattern recursively? You'll find that this is happening in this picture. See, for example, here you're down, down, up. Then it starts with down, down, up. Okay, and here also down, down, up, down, down, up, up. Starts with that, down, down, up, down, down, up, up. But it's not repeating that. Okay, n plus 1 is not repeating the n. It starts with the nth one, at least for the small cases. So does the pattern start like that all the time? In fact, it is true that it does start with the previous one, and we can see many other patterns. For example, the 2 rth crease is same as rth crease, and we can write a very nice recursion for this. If I write say 1 and minus 1 for the down and the up, then it is like this. The 2 power r times 2n plus 1th crease is just the multiple of the 2 power rth crease by plus or minus 1. When I mean plus or minus 1, it is the same or opposite. That's what it means. So essentially the first, second, fourth, 8th, 16th, 32nd, these creases will determine the whole sequence. Now, of course, here we folded the sequence from top to bottom. Now we can do sometimes bottom to top in between. So there are many such paper folding sequences. So this infinite sequence is called a paper folding sequence. So as I said, we can do folding upwards or downwards. But at every stage, we have many such sequences. We can make several observations. For example, when you have a paper folding sequence, you unfold it a few times, you get again a paper folding sequence. So there are many patterns. Nevertheless, it's still mysterious. So I'll tell you why it is mysterious. For instance, you might think after some time it becomes periodic. Although there was a recursion there, I wrote down, it is not periodic. In fact, you have the following result, which I hope to convince you, make you understand. So what you do is whenever you have a sequence fn, you make what's called a generating function. Make a series like that. You put summation fn x power n, and for any value of x, you can calculate this series. Okay, suppose it converges, then there is a value. So what happens is this series, whenever you take a paper folding sequence, take a value of x, which is what is called algebraic. Algebraic simply means something which satisfies a polynomial over Q, which means something like rational numbers. For example, you take the value x equal to half here. Then this can be evaluated. This series sum turns out to be a transcendental value. It's not even algebraic. So what happens is if fn were periodic, eventually periodic, then such a series would turn out to be a rational function. It will be actually algebraic number. So this shows another. You don't need this to show, but this also shows that fn's is not eventually periodic. Okay. So in fact, these kind of sequences are called what is called automatic sequences. So for example, the regular sequence that I originally produced, where folded always the top to the bottom on top, then that sequence is produced by what is called 2 automaton. So I won't say much more about this because discussing about automatic sequences takes a long time again. It's very interesting. As I said, you take the help of our friend Sundar Pichai, which means I simply mean that look at Google. So here the 2 automaton, which produces our regular paper folding sequence. Beautiful patterns, but not periodic. Okay, let me jump to the next problem now. Okay, so here is the story of Josephus. It's a very interesting story. It's of course, this person did exist. Story might be a myth, but person existed. So this person, Flavius Josephus, and 39 of his friends were surrounded by the enemies. Okay, he was holding a revolt against Romans. This is long back in the 1st century. So they decided, okay, let us not get caught. They will torture us rather than become slaves. We'll kill ourselves. But how do we decide how to kill ourselves? In what? So they decided they'll arrange themselves in a circle. So there are these 40 people in a circle. So starting somewhere, they went clockwise around the circle, and every 7th person was eliminated. So of course, the person who's eliminated is not counted anymore. They keep on doing this for every 7th person until the last person. One person survives and he has to kill himself. Now the story is that Josephus was a clever mathematician, and he arranged so that everybody else was shot, and then he was the last survivor. And rather than kill himself, he joined the ranks of the enemy. Anyway, so this is how the story. This is maybe my myth, but let's look at the problem. What does it mean? Let's find out what his position could be. So, okay, of course, I had 40 people, and every 7th person was eliminated. Instead, you can have some general number of people, and let's see, look at eliminate people in clockwise order, and say every 10th person is eliminated. Can we find who is the last person to be eliminated when we start with somebody? What is the position of the last survivor? So let's see for our 40 wala. I think you tried to do. I haven't given the answer here deliberately. There are 40 people in the circle, and 7th is killed, and 14th is killed, 21st is killed, 28th, 35th, 2nd, and you see, after 2nd, this person is killed, 10th has to be killed because 7 is no longer there. This way, you keep on proceeding. Try to find out who the last survivor is. If you just do it by hand, you will find that you often make some mistakes. It's a long process. Okay, so let's now. So I just want to say this is actually, it's not surprising. It's a problem about permutations. Sorry. So suppose, so just AR is the rth person to be eliminated. So first person to be eliminated, second person to be eliminated. We call them A1, A2, etc. Which means this is a permutation of the numbers 1, 2 to n. So we want the last survivor means we want AN, the last person, nth person. So let me tell you something curious. There is, first of all, there is no known very nice closed formula. Of course, you can describe the permutation itself very explicitly in some way, but nevertheless, there is no explicit formula for AN in general, that is for general D. But for special D, I can give you a formula, and it is very interesting. We can find a formula when every 2nd person is killed. So there's let's say n people are seated around a circle, and you're killing every 2nd person. Okay, killing looks like very violent. Let me just say removing every 2nd person. So what is this? The formula is very neatly expressed in the following way, using again binary digits. So if there are n persons, write the number n in the binary expansion, right? D0, D1, D2, DR, or the D0 plus D1 times 2, etc. Okay, so plus DR times 2 power R. This is the number n in base 2. So let's say we assume starting with eliminating with number 2, number 4, number 6. You're going starting with the number, so the 2nd, 4th are eliminated in that order. Then look at this new number where this top digit DR is shifted to the end, made the unit digit. That means the new number is DR plus 2 times D0, like that. Okay, the DR of n, the last topmost digit is, which is of course 1, is shifted to the end. Look at this new number. Then the position of the last person to be killed is just this. Very quick way of finding it. So why is this formula valid? Let me just tell you about, for example, let's say there are 26 people in a circle. What is 26 in base 2? This is this number. 12 plus 8 plus 2, 4, sorry. So, sorry. Then the last person to be killed is 10101. Because by that formula here, 101, what is the position? 21. So let's call these 26 people A, B, C, D, etc. So let's say A to Z are sitting cyclically and every second person is killed. And what is the last, who's the last person remaining? You, which I mean you. Okay. Anyway, so why is this formula valid? So I have an explanation here. I'll just tell you the explanation in terms of pack of cards, but I will not discuss it in detail. I have it here in the file. You can look at it later. But you notice one thing. This problem is the same as the following problem. Take a pack of n cards. Okay. The top, every time you do the following thing. The top card is placed at the bottom. The next card is discarded. It's like eliminating second person. The next top card is placed at the bottom. The next card is discarded. So every second card is being discarded like that. And the process is continued until only one card is left. So this is the same problem. So you can easily argue here that there is a nice algorithm, and it'll tell you that this number is this. I'll just jump and I'll say this. Nth the last person to be killed is this. If there are n minus 2 power r cards, then this is person. This formula can be written in terms of the base 2 expansion, what I mentioned in the beginning. If n has this base 2 expansion, A1, A2, AD, then A2, A1 is the base 2 expansion of this number. So explanation is given why this is the answer. I don't want to go into it here, because I'll leave it to you to also think about it a little bit. Okay, just mention in passing, for general D, there is a formula for the rth person to be eliminated. That means every dth person is eliminated and there are n people. And who's the rth person who is eliminated? It is this permutation. This symbol, if people who don't know this, it means a cycle 1, 2 to n, 1 goes to 2, 2 goes to 3, etc. to n, n goes to 1, and apply d minus 1 times, and then this permutation, this cycle. So this is a very explicitly determined permutation. Nevertheless, what we want is, suppose we want to know who is the nth person. That means for r equal to n, what is this value? It's not possible to find in a easy manner. Okay, so let me again jump to another problem. I just mentioned this, because this you might have faced practically many times. Solving this will require some very basic, maybe college mathematics. I'll mention what that is. So this sometimes learned in high school also. I called it high school or beginning college level mathematics. Suppose you are seated in a restaurant. Usually you go to a restaurant, there is a table, rectangular table, many people are seated. And we find suddenly that it is shaking. It's not very stable. The leg is not level. So you're annoyed, and then you try to call the waiter, or maybe you try to solve the problem. You take a piece of paper, fold it, put it below one of the legs, and arrange it. And keep on doing it until it's exactly level. There is sometimes you have too much paper, and then etc. So how do you? This is not required. Provided, of course, the floor is something. It is not of different dimensions. It is a level floor, except it is not straight. It's not horizontal. So assuming the floor is a continuous floor, which is of course difficult in India, okay, and its inclination is not more than what is called 35.2. I'll tell you why 35.2 degrees. This is the smallest value when tan becomes more than 1 by root 2. So the floor is not too inclined. Then you can solve the problem simply by the following way. Okay, first of all, of course, assume the table, the feet of the table don't have very short legs. They have very short legs, this will not work. The length should have at least half the diagonal of the table. Without any leg digging into the floor, table can simply be rotated to get a stable position. You don't have to make any paper, you don't have to do anything else. Just rotate the table, at some point it becomes stable. Becomes a stable table. What is the answer? Why this is true? Once again, as I said, I haven't given the details here. Again, it takes a long time to discuss. But the magic word here is, or magic phrase here is, the so-called intermediate value theorem. So that's why I said this floor is continuous. So function which is continuous, intermediate value theorem will say something like, suppose it has certain value and certain other value, a continuous function will take every value in between also. Because of this, it can be solved. This is a very practical kind of solution. Okay. How are we doing? I think I'm going quite fast. Let me.
No, sir, it's okay. You can continue.
Yes. So here is a trick that the magician in you can perform with an associate. This particular problem actually we posted in the Regional Math Olympiad in Delhi. So regional level, not for the whole India, but only for the Delhi level. It's a very difficult problem actually. But the solution is so beautiful that I wanted to present it. So in some sense, I was saying that I'm not going to discuss Olympiad type problem, but you can think of this as Olympiad type problem. Nevertheless, it is a magic which you can actually perform with your friend. Let's see what the problem is. Okay, I've written in a large amount of text here. So let me read it out. So we have a deck of 52 cards. Because we have these four suites in that, each having cards numbered 1 to 13. I don't call them Jack, Queen and all. I call them with numbers 1 to 13. So what is there is a huge audience. So audience, so you, the magician, you're not in the room, you're somewhere else. Your associate is there in the room with the audience. The audience chooses some 5 cards. The rule is that they have to choose 5 cards with distinct numbers. Okay, so it could be like 4 spades, 5 clubs, things like that. Associate of the magician comes by, looks at the 5 cards. Okay, she just looks at the 5 cards, and after carefully looking at it, she turns exactly one of them face down, which means you can't see what is the picture, what is the number, and arranges all the cards, all the 5 cards, including the face down card, in some order. Then you enter after a little while, and just looking at the card, you just don't even touch anything. After looking at the card, you'll say what the card is that is face down. It looks absolutely impossible, right? Remember what this the thing? 5 cards have been selected at random by the audience. Only thing is the 5 cards are different 5 numbers, and one of them is face down, kept face down, and all the other 4 are kept face up. You can see the numbers. They are arranged in some order. After which, associate can also leave the room. You enter and you can, just looking at the cards, you can find out what it is. What I should do is maybe I think just to leave this as a very mysterious thing, I'll come to it at the end as a solution here. And it's based on very simple logic plus permutations. Okay. So I won't go through this right away. Okay. So let me go to this class of problems. Now I'm going to discuss a sort of class of problems, which all have to do with, again, shapes. So these are called tiling problems. When you say tiling, you mean you're fitting in a shape with different shapes so that it completely fills up without intersection, without overlap. So first problem is, let's say, try to cut a square, any square, into finitely minute triangles, possibly of different shapes. Triangles may be scalene, whatever shapes. Each triangle may have a different shape, but only condition is all of them have equal area. Suppose you try to do that. So tiling means you are placing triangles inside the square so that they fill it up and don't overlap. So I can't draw a very good picture. I'll draw a very sort of regular picture. But the fact of the matter is that whichever way you tile it, the number of triangles you find is always even. Okay, let's see one picture here. And the point I'm mentioning this is, the proof of this requires some high-class mathematics in some sense, which I will gloss over, mention what is required, and I'll mention the proof also. So the high-class mathematics is what is called two-adic valuations. You can never guess. You know, I didn't want to spend time on the history of the problem, but I'll tell you one statement. This problem by mistake was posed in an MSc examination by somebody who had to quickly pose a question, and he had not solved it. He realized that he could not solve it, nobody could solve it. It's an open problem. Later, it was solved by people. So better be careful when you pose questions. You should know the solution. So let's come to a picture. I'll show you. Here is a picture. I hope you can see something. On graph paper, I've drawn a square. I hope it looks like a square. Okay, I think it's, and there are, I think, how many? 16 triangles. I tried to keep different shapes, not necessarily rectangle and all that. Nevertheless, all of them have equal area. You can see by graph paper that each of them has equal area. Okay, and you find there are 16 triangles. Of course, this is just an example. So before discussing something more about this particular problem, I want to mention how these kind of problems practically also arise. So now, this is a very old problem in statistical mechanics. This involves so-called dominoes. What are dominoes? Not for pizza. I mean, domino is a rectangle formed by joining together two unit squares along an edge. Okay. So suppose you want to, you have a rectangle grid like that, like we had in the beginning. Just think of it as a lattice inside on the plane. So you want to grid, you want to tile it using dominoes. So actually in the practical problem that I talked about, statistical mechanical problem, these dominoes are thought of as two molecules. A domino is sort of two molecules connected by a bond. And this is a model for molecules on a lattice. It has actually been used like that. From the number of domino tilings, thermodynamical properties can be calculated when there is some condition called zero energy of mixing. So it is practical, all right. I'll tell you what, for example, for a 2 cross n grid, let's take a 2 cross n grid. Okay, you want to fill a 2 cross n grid with dominoes. What is the number of domino tilings? How many ways can you do it? I hope it is. Oh, I think it is getting hidden there. The only choices are the following. You can either place a single vertical domino on the first column. Okay, because it can be broken, right? Or you can have like this. One domino on the leftmost column, or two horizontal dominoes on the two leftmost columns. Because if you put a domino on the top like this, so this way, this easily gives the recursion. This is the recursion. Number of domino tilings Cn is Cn minus 1 plus Cn minus 2. Why is that? Because what you have is, in this case, is Cn minus 1. In this case, it is Cn minus 2. So, of course, you can find what is C1 and C2 easily. So, looking at the small cases and this recursion, which people would immediately, it will ring a bell. What is this number of, what is the number Cn which you get? Yes, it is the Fibonacci sequence. So, number of domino tilings of a 2 cross n grid is Fn, nth Fibonacci number. 2 cross n grid was very easy with this recursion, but with more general grids, so what you have to do is you associate some graph to it. Okay, and you can study it very effectively through graph theory. I should mention that there are physicists, Temperley and Fisher were two physicists were there, and then Castellan. Independently, they proved the following beautiful formula, unbelievable kind of formula. Both of them are physicists, by the way, statistical mechanics people. And they proved that if you have a m cross n grid where m is even, just like our 2 cross n, more general than that, the number of tilings is this. Looks completely crazy because you have all this cos, and it can even be root 2 and irrational numbers and whatnot. Not to talk about even it may not even be like root 2, root 3, maybe some very bizarre numbers. But all of them multiply out to give a positive integer, and that is a number. So in fact, this is proved using the method I mentioned above. Associate a graph to this. I will not say more about this because this is again very fascinating. It will take a long time to say why this is. Okay, so let me come back to this triangle problem. So when you tile a square with triangles of equal area, then there must be an even number of triangles. Let's see how the proof goes. I can very easily indicate a nice proof here. Modulo, something that you will ask you to assume. So first I'll introduce, let me see how am I, 1242. Okay, how am I doing for time? So look at the so-called, this, you have a mapping from rational numbers to rational numbers. the following mapping. It's called two-adic valuation. That means simply this. Take a non-zero rational number, x. So take out the power of 2, either. So write the number as p by q, where p and q don't have any common factors. It's possible that p and q are both odd, in which case the value of the function phi is just 0. Okay, it's possible the numerator is even, in which case the power of 2 dividing numerator, that is your value of phi. Similarly, the value of phi is the negative number. You write the new denominator as 2 power k times some odd number, then minus k is the value of phi. So the value of phi here is takes in positive or negative integers or 0. This is called two-adic valuation. Because this doesn't require anything. This is high school. Of course, for completion's sake, we do require that value of 0 also defined to be infinite, and this infinite is supposed to be larger than any number that you will come across here. So what the trick is the following: to solve this problem about tiling by triangles, take points of rationals cross rational, ordered pairs of rationals. You want to color each rational such pair by one of 3 colors: red, blue, and green. How do you color them? You color them as red by red if both the phi values are positive. What does it mean? If you look at, okay, let me just say blue if this happens and green if this happens. What does this mean? I hope I have explained it here. Yeah. So point is red if the numerators are both even. Phi values are both positive. The pair is blue if whenever I write x as b by 2 power u times c with bc odd and u is bigger than 0, bigger than or equal to 0. So either the power of u below for x is bigger than the power of 2 in the denominator of y. That is what this looking condition. So it will take you a little while to get used to this color, but I'll show you a picture. Green if the rest of the thing. So by this process, actually you would have colored all the points by either red or blue or green. There is no intersection between them and they cover all the points. And what is the main thing is that, okay, for example, 2, 0 is red, 1, 3 is blue, and 1 half is green, etc. I'll show you a picture. So before showing the picture, let me just say what is very, very crucial here is that we have to extend this function phi on the whole of real numbers. We just defined it on rational numbers, where you could look at the power of 2 dividing, etc. Of course, it doesn't make sense in real numbers. So we want to extend this function. And the extension should satisfy the following properties. So product of 2 numbers, the value is the sum of the values. And for the sum of the values, the value should be at least the minimum. So people who do some number theory will see that this is what is called two-adic valuation. So we need such an extension. We do need such an extension because you would like to color all the points in the square. Square has part of real cross real. So you want to color all the points of the square. So we do need a function which will extend to R. So the extension of such a phi is guaranteed by some higher mathematics, which we can sweep under the carpet. But it is easy to assume for us because there's nothing to understand. You say, okay, let's assume there is such an extension. Then what do we have? For example, look at value of root 3 by 2. Because the first condition that phi of xy equal to phi x plus phi y, phi of root 3 by 2 will be -1. Why is that? Because phi of 3 by 4 is phi of root 3 by 2 into root 3 by 2, which is twice of phi of root 3 by 2. And phi of 3 by 4 is -2. So phi of root 3 by 2 is -1. Just to give an indication. Now let me show the picture. How coloring looks like. An approximate. Let's stare at it for a little while so that you understand how the coloring is going to look. See the corner 0, 0 corner. I put a unit square here. 0, 0 is red, 1, 0 is blue, 0, 1 is green, and 1, 1 is blue. And when you keep staring at this picture, you'll notice a number of things. First thing you notice is that, okay, let's look at the leftmost line. Colors are red and green. Next line, blue and green. Somewhere it is blue and green, red and green. First thing you notice is that every line has only 2 colors. Every line, there are only 2 colors. and every line has two colors. There is no fully blue or fully red or something. Okay, so what you will do is, I will use this word phrase called a triangle to be complete. Okay, suppose if I form a triangle, then look at the three vertices. The three vertices are of all of different colors. Then we call a complete triangle. So complete triangles will show always exist. That's why we require this property. And okay, let me go down. So there are a number of observations you can make with these colors, which I said takes time, but it's all very easy. I'll just tell you the gist of what we require. I mentioned it in detail because when you look at the file, it should make sense. But for talking, I can just tell you, not the proof, but I'll tell you. Okay. The main observation. So what is the main observation? That there is always a complete triangle. We are making a lot of observations about the various lines in that square, coloring of the lines. Every point, every line has only two colors, etc., etc. There is always a complete triangle. So let's assume this, that previous observations, which I haven't shown you in detail, they can be easily verified. Each of them is very easy to verify, by the way, just by common simple logic and the definition of phi. Okay. This, see, what will happen is, if you don't have a complete triangle, it will happen that something is positive as well as negative. That's what it turns out. That's how the function phi is used. Anyway, so there is always a triangle whose colors are 3. So how does it help? Now the beautiful thing is that every complete triangle has an area whose phi value is negative. That's what you're going to prove now. How does that help? This will complete the proof. Because suppose we fill it with n triangles, all of equal area. So let's say our square is unit square, because it doesn't matter. Unit square, as you are shown in the picture, then each of the areas is 1 by n. And what is the phi value of 1 by n? So if you show that phi is negative, then phi of 1 by n is negative, that forces n to be even. Because you see, phi is the power of 2 dividing. Okay. So fact that phi of a complete triangle is negative is crucial. So let's see how that follows. So look at a complete triangle. Let's just move the vertices so that they are at 0, 0. One of the vertices at the origin, A, B, and C, D. So they are all different colors. Because 0, 0 is red. Okay. Because phi value is infinity, which is positive, supposed to be positive. AB is blue and CD is green, let's say. And you look at the definition of what is blue point and green point. The following you'll see. AB is blue. That means phi of A is less than or equal to phi of B. The definition of blue. And CD is green. Phi of C is bigger than phi of D. And of course, phi satisfies phi of AD is some of the phi's. So looking at this, you'll find that this area AD minus BC by 2. Calculate phi of AD minus AC. You'll find that it is less than or equal to 0, which means phi of AD minus BC by 2 is strictly less than 0. So this coloring proof tells you that coloring a square with triangles of equal area would force number of triangles to be even. Really amazing. Let me pass to. I think I'll ask our host, and can I take another 15-20 minutes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, let's discuss another type, because tiling problems come in different shapes, as I said. So let's discuss tiling integer rectangles with integer rectangles now, which means what? Length of the sides is integer. So can we tile a rectangle of size 28 by cross 17 by rectangles of size 4 cross 7? So when I talk about this tiling problem, some of them sort of popular, so you might have seen some of them, but I'll try to mention many more and which you might not have seen. So this you might have seen. This is quite a popular thing. Okay, so 4 cross 7 rectangle has area 28, which of course divides 28 cross 17. So at least in terms of area, it's not ruled out. Okay, so you see a number of 4 cross 7 rectangles you're placing either this way or that way, and it should fill the 28 cross 17 rectangle without overlapping. Okay, we cannot tile it nevertheless. Why? Because look at each row of the big rectangle. If you have managed to tile as required, then the 17 the length 17 of that rectangle would be made of various sides for the 4 cross 7 rectangles, either the 4 or the 7. That means 17 would be a combination of 4 and 7. You can easily see it is not. So you cannot tile a 28 cross 17 rectangle by a 4 cross 7 rectangle. You do require each of them to be positive combination of 4 and 7. Not only that. So is it enough? A necessary condition for tiling M cross N with A cross B is that, of course, the area should divide, AB should divide Mn, and each of these M and N should be positive linear combinations. That is, we noticed already. But is it enough? No, even this is not enough. For example, look at 1 cross 6. Since 1 is there, everything is a positive combination of this. Nevertheless, you cannot tile it. Why? So to say this, we'll say it in more generality. We show that if A cross B rectangle tiles M cross N, means what? You have copies of A cross B rectangles placed in an M cross N rectangle, filling it without overlapping. We show that we know that it is A must divide either M or N and B must divide M or N. Both should divide. So in our case of previous case, 1 cross 6, 6 does not divide 10 or 15. Okay, so tiling is not possible. So why is this true? Why am I claiming this? So let's look at not a 1 cross 1 rectangle, but 1 cross A cross B, where A is bigger than 1. So let's do this thing. We'll take this M cross N rectangle and fill it in the following way. Fill it with the numbers now. These numbers are what is called roots of unity. Eighth roots of unity. You know, the roots of unity are complex numbers. You have various roots of unity. This, I guess, in high school you do learn it at the end. So this is the number you can think of zeta as a e to the power 2 pi I by a, like that. This is the primitive eighth root of unity. The square, its cube, etc. You take eighth power, it becomes 1. A is the smallest number, so that power becomes 1. So the real and imaginary parts of this number are cos 2 pi by a and sin 2 pi by a. Like, okay, anyway. So let's fill it like that. Oh, I didn't write zeta here, I written z here. So I filled it like this somehow, let's say. Whatever I do, I fill it. In other words, let me explain how do you fill it. Ij entry is filled with this number, power of the primitive root of unity by I plus j minus 2. Now, since we are tiling the rectangle, big rectangle, M cross N, that means every tile is having one root of unity only once, 1 zeta, etc., zeta power a minus 1. Doesn't have zeta power anything repeated, or it has each of these ones exactly. But you notice one thing, sum of the roots of unity is always 0. Okay, this is because the polynomial x to the power a minus 1, the sum of the roots is 0. It is the penultimate coefficient of that polynomial, 0. So because of this, since every tile has value 0, sum of the value is 0, that means whole rectangle sum also must be 0. So what are you doing in the whole rectangle now? That means you're looking at this sum, zeta power I plus j minus 2, which is the ijth entry, and summing all the entries. This is 0. But this double sum, I and j, sum over I and j, can be as a product of two single sums. Zeta power I minus 1. What does this mean? The first sum is 0. So that means, say, zeta is primitive eighth root of unity. So this can be 0 only when a divides m. Similarly, second sum is 0 only if a divides n. So this product is 0 means a must divide either m or n. Similarly, b must divide either m or n. So this condition is also necessary. But we can easily show that these conditions are sufficient, and even using this idea, we can even tile it. In other words, give numbers a and b so that a divides m or n, b divides n m or n, and ab divides mn. Then you can tile a m cross n rectangle by copies of a cross b rectangle, just by using this idea of roots of unity. Anyway, I just mentioned this general result. This is a general condition when it can be tiled. Actually, not just 2 dimensions, it can go to any dimensions, you can do this. So you see, it's elementary. Just one thing it uses is roots of unity. Okay, here is another very curious thing which many people might have seen or heard of. Suppose a tile rectangle, each of which has at least one of its side integral. Then the big rectangle must also have a side of integral length. Okay, you're just tiling a rectangle, its sides, the sides of the smaller rectangles, they might have different shapes, different sizes. But each of the smaller rectangles has at least one side which is integer length. Then the big rectangle must have it. Then a number of proofs of doing this, ways of doing it, proving it. I'll tell you one way of doing it. Okay, draw the rectangle like this as parallel to the x and y axis. Then I'm very quickly, I'll just mention it. Don't get worried about it. That this integral turns out to be this. People may not be used to this complex integral, but in school, others know it. So look at this integral. This is so the fact that each smaller rectangle which you use as a tile has one side which is integral means that one of this e power 2 pi I b minus e power 2 pi I a is 0. Or this or this is 0. In other words, you're summing over zeros, the whole rectangle also sum is 0, which means for the whole rectangle also, the property that either length or breadth is an integer. So I very quickly went over this. Maybe let me see how much time I have. Let me skip this. It is very interesting. Okay, let me just say that we cannot tile a rectangle by triangles which are similar to the right angle triangle 30, 60, 90. But you can tile it with triangles which are similar to this. Similar means all the angles are same as this. Sizes may be different. So all this can be proved using some basic linear algebra. Which triangles can tile? The complete answer is known. Okay, I won't. It involves tan theta. I've given the complete answer in the file. Okay, I'll just very quickly go to another way of tiling, which uses electric networks. So this problem that I talked about, integer sides, large rectangle which is tiled by smaller rectangles, each one having some integer side, then the large rectangle must have integer side. That problem was solved also using electrical networks. Max Den, who's a topologist, showed that this. He showed more. A rectangle can be tiled by squares if and only if the aspect ratio of the rectangle is a rational number. And while proving this, reproving this, four students actually used electric circuit theory. Idea is to represent each horizontal line segment in the drawing of the squared rectangle as a dot. Each dot represents the terminal of the electric circuit. And when do you join two dots? If you have a square with horizontal sides, then there is a line joining those two dots in the graph. For example, and also what you use is so-called a famous laws called Kirchhoff's laws, how the current must be believed. So the circuit is to be complete. It asserts the sum of the currents flowing at any of the terminals must be 0. And second law is for the sum of the entire circuit. Using this, for example, I just give a very quick picture here. Here is a rectangle tiled by squares. Squares of side 36, 25, 2, 9, 5, 7, 16, 33, 28. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 squares have been used. I think less than 9 you cannot do. So I have associated a graph to it here. If you can look at it, then you'll see that this graph represents this tiling actually. And what is more, if you can draw such a picture in electrical circuit, which obeys the Kirchhoff's laws, you can get a tiling. So you can get tiling from electrical circuits. I've given one more picture here. So let me just jump here. Let me see. Okay, let me mention this problem for you to do. Or perhaps I'll jump this. I don't have too much time. Let me come to this. Okay, so I'm talking about something called lattice polygons. So if you have on the plane you put lattice points, you mark lattice points, and suppose you have polygon whose vertices are at lattice points. It may or may not be convex. You just have a polygon whose vertices are all at lattice points. Then can you show the area? Of course, many of you might have seen the so-called Fick's theorem. which tells you by counting lattice points what the area is. It says just count the number of lattice points strictly inside the polygon and call it I, and look at the points which are on the boundary, call it B. Then the area is I plus B by 2 minus 1. That's called Pick's formula, which I'm not talking about here. You can look at Google again for that or any other source. But here is a very nice observation made by Peter Scott, actually using very elementary geometry, that the number of boundary points B is always at the most 2i plus 7. If the polygon is convex, that is, otherwise it's not true. Can have examples. So because of this, so let's call a polygon to be legal, but exactly one lattice point. Exactly one lattice point strictly inside. Call such a polygon legal polygon. In fact, to prove Pick's theorem also, you can use this idea of legal polygons. Anyway, I'm not going to prove Pick's theorem, but let's do the following thing. So Scott determined all the legal polygons, that means those which have exactly one lattice point inside, and which can be moved by, up to certain transformations called modular transformation. These are the following polygons. There are 16 of them. You see, each of them has exactly one lattice point inside, the internal point. Of course, there are points on the boundary, but there are exactly 16 equivalence classes of legal polygons. So this is very recently proved that using this, okay, following thing was proved. It does require, I can't give a proof, but I'll indicate what it involves. Suppose P is any legal polygon, okay? So polygon with vertices P1, P2, Pn, such that inside there is only one lattice point. We define corresponding to a polygon, legal polygon P, a dual, so-called dual polygon. How do you define the dual polygon? What are its vertices? So it will, first of all, you form the, you look at the points, sort of what the vector subtraction P2 minus P1. Think of them P2 and P1 as vectors from the origin. Then P2 minus P1 is a vector Q1, Q2, etc., Qn. So when you do this, of course, it's possible that some Qi is also equal to Qj. It's possible. Okay, the difference is thought of as vectors. And look at these points and look at the smallest convex set containing it. Smallest convex set which contains these points. That is defined to be the dual polygon. So let me give a picture. For instance, look at this polygon. Here is your legal polygon, P1, P2. Notice that Q1 is the vector sum, P1 minus P2 minus P1. So to say P1, you go to, let's say the lattice point inside, let's call it as the origin. Think of this as origin. So you have P1 and P2, right? That gives Q1. P1 plus P2 gives Q1. So like that, yes. Notice that in this dual polygon, Q3 and Q4 are same. Note the remarkable fact that discrete lengths. So how do you define the length of the boundary segments? We just look at the number of lattice points on the boundary and subtract 1. But for each of them, here so the number is 5 plus 7. This is called discrete length. Number is always 12 for each of them. This is true for every legal polygon and its dual. And of course, the proof here requires very high class of mathematics. Just I wanted to mention that because our own Ramanujan's name has to come up here. So this one of the proofs, one of the things uses is so-called Ramanujan's modular form of weight 12, which is one of the objects studied in modern mathematics, very central part of mathematics and number theory. So I don't mention anything about the lattice polygons, but let me mention one problem about geometry and primes. Let's start with a small circle. Okay, suppose you take n points on the circle equally situated. So divide the circumference into n equal parts. So just take one point and join it to the other n minus 1 points. Take any one of them and join it to the other n minus 1 point. Make the n minus 1 chords. So for each of these chords, let's look at the circle which is unit radius. Then each chord has certain length, and what is the product of the lengths? This is actually very easy. Let me show the picture first. Let's say there are 6 things. So I deliberately drawn the picture like this so you can actually see what is happening. these 6 vertices, these are the 6 vertices of a regular hexagon. Oh, sorry, I put 8 points, octagon, regular octagon. So you can think of the n points as points corresponding to nth roots of unity in general. So when you join P1 to P2, P1 to P3, etc., you want the lengths of this. This is easy to find. Okay, first before that, let me say a more difficult problem is to start from one of the points and go and say anti-clockwise direction and draw the chord joining it to the kth point where k is co-prime to n. Here I am joining this to every point. Okay. In the second problem, more difficult problem, you don't join it to the second point because 2 is not co-prime to 8. You join it only to the ones which are co-prime. P1 is joining to the first point, third point, like from third point from P1. Okay. So again, what is the product of the lengths? The answers are very different actually. The first case, as I said, the problem is very easy. Okay, in this second case, which is very unusual, answer is prime P or 1. If n is a prime power of prime P, then the product equals P. If n is not a prime power, then it is 1. Very interesting answer that is. So let me just say something about the proof of the first side first. The easy problem. The endpoints are thought of as nth roots of unity. And what is the length of a chord? This is nothing but we have two complex numbers, z and w. The length of the segment joining them is modulus of z minus w. So you want this modulus of 1 minus. So the 1 point you are taking as 1. Okay, which is e power 2 pi n by n. And so distance of n, these are the lengths of the n minus 1 chords, and their product is, you can easily see it is n, because what is this product? Without taking modulus, the product is just this product. Sorry. So look at this product, P of n, which I call P of n. This is nothing but evaluating the polynomial 1 minus x power n by 1 minus x. Because you see, I have not have 1 minus 1 here. What is 1 minus x power n by 1 minus x? It is the polynomial 1 plus x square up till x power n minus 1. So when you evaluate x equal to 1, which is what I have done here, you get the value n. So the first question has answer n. It's very interesting. So in the first picture I showed of octagon, the product is equal to 8. What about second problem? I just mentioned it's a slight amount of number theory I mentioned here. So second problem actually counts in the same way. It counts the following product of 1 minus zeta power d, zeta being primitive nth root of unity, and only d for which d is co-prime to n you are counting. This is what you want to count. Qn is your, but you can easily see that product over all chords is nothing but product of all the q's here that are dividing n. Meaning what I mean is, if you have nth root of unity, it is an rth root of unity for some r, which is maximum. In other words, it is a primitive rth root of unity. There is a unique r like that. So this is gathering together all the primitive rth root of unity. This is gathering all the nth root of unity, P of n. So somehow can you, you already counted P of n. P of n equal to n. So can you count Q of r? So one way to do is what's called Möbius inversion formula. Möbius inversion formula is a formula which tells you if you have a function which is sum of another function with the argument being divisors of n, then you can invert it. Similarly, you can do for product also. Product, it comes out to be this. And since I calculate P of d to be this, it comes out this, and I'll just rush through this. Very easy to calculate this number. It involves something called Mangold function. Mangold function of a natural number is, n is log of p if n is the power of prime p and 0 otherwise. Somehow this product, its log comes out to be in terms of Mangold function. So in fact, we get this value, PR1. I don't go through this because it's taking too much time, but it's very easy to see. You can yourself sit and look at it. Finally, and I think, okay, I should probably not do this also. I'll go ahead. Okay. Many people might have heard of the game called NIM, and I'll just mention one game called Whitehoff game. Since I ran out of time, I'll just mention the picture here. Suppose you have a queen on a infinite chessboard. Let's say 1/4 of the infinite chessboard. This is going up and around to the right infinitely many times, infinitely. So queen can move either this or this way or diagonally. The idea is to reach this place, the first square, leftmost bottom square. Two players play, each player. So you play and then your opponent plays. So there should be a strategy for winning. This problem is same thing, what is called Whitehouse game. It says that, so you have two piles of coins, okay? And maybe may not be equal number, some number of coins. Each player alternately plays. One player removes some number of coins from one pile. Could be any number, it could be the whole pile also. Or if she is allowed to remove from both piles, but then in that case, she should remove equal number of coins from both piles. Now you realize it is the same thing as the queen problem. Queen going along diagonal is like removing equal amounts from both piles. So again, which are the, sorry, what algorithm can we have? Who can win? What is the safe combination? Here, I just want to mention here that the algorithm can be provided by using what is called Fibonacci numbers, expansion of any number in terms of Fibonacci numbers. It's called Zeckendorf expansion. Very beautiful again. Many people may not have seen this. The Zeckendorf expansion is very useful. Many other games you can formulate with it. So I'll just finish by, I wanted to say this following thing. I just want to finish with this. This is for teachers also. I hope I can take another just 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So to actually, this is last year. So 3 years back, there was an investigation into the role of attention. So there are school teachers in South Africa, for example, they're good teachers. They know their stuff and they're teaching well and all that. They know their basics well, but they had a small test. So this test was to analyze the teacher's ability to pay attention to detail and how to use her mathematical knowledge. Okay, what happened to us? These teachers are all good, so they can be expected to have an excellent knowledge of the basic techniques. And the question examined whether this kind of knowledge might structure the attention in such a way, meaning since they know the mathematics, would they just jump to something without thinking? Because you are guided by your training, so you quickly go into that. So participant teachers were given a small test. I'll tell you the questions. Is 7 simple questions. Let me tell you the questions. First question, find the area of the right angle triangle where the hypotenuse is 10 centimeters and the height to the hypotenuse is 6 centimeters. Okay, I'll come back to this. Question 2, find the domain of this function y equal to f of g of x, where fx is x square plus 1 and gx is root of x minus 2. All basic, let's say college, if not school. Solve the equation log of this x square plus 17x minus 18 minus log of something else equal to 0. Prove this identity, sine of x equal to square root of 1 minus cos square x. Show that x square plus root x plus 1 by x minus 1 equal to 0 has a solution in the interval between 0 and 2. Find the derivative of the function y equal to log of something something. And the last question, determine this integral minus 1 to 1 dx by x. So what happened? They were given this test. So these questions are of course sort of provocative in the sense that they look like very routine, easy questions, but each of them had a catch. Each one of them had a catch. They found that the results were very, very startling, amazing, because majority of the people gave incorrect answers. After they gave the answers, they said, "See, this is all of this is incorrect. Can you correct it?" And all of them could correct it. Why is that? So I wanted to make this point here that first question is find the area of the right angle triangle. Hypotenuse 10 centimeters, right to the hypotenuse is 6 centimeters. Answer is what? There is no such triangle. You can just see what is the hypotenuse is the diameter of a right angle triangle. So you see, it can be at the most 5. It can never have a 6 centimeter long. So if you just blindly try to calculate and do something, you might get wrong answer. So no such triangle exists. So the question is meaningless. Second question is this. So what did most of the people do? Fx is x square plus 1. Gx is root of x minus 2. So you put f of gx. That means root of x minus 2 square is x minus 2. So x minus 2 plus 1 is x minus 1. Fx equal to x minus 1. So they said, okay, whole whole of real numbers is a domain. But it's not so, because this each has to be defined. They just simplified it using f of g of x. Don't do it. Got the wrong answer. Solve this equation, log of this. There is no solution, because you see, blindly solving it, realizing that x is equal to 1, which is there, which is outside the domain. You cannot do it. There's just no solution. This is again mistake. Putting it like this, it says infinitely many solutions. All these are solutions. So say that prove the identity means you just prove it. It's not an identity. Then this equation, again, this reminds you of the stable table problem, so-called intermediate value theorem. You put the value at something. See, for example, the value at 0 and value at 2 are opposite signs. So there must be a value in between where it is 0. So they just used intermediate value theorem to prove this, that it has a solution. But you see, you cannot, this you cannot apply the intermediate value theorem. Remember, first of all, what does it look like? In this interval, this is always positive here. X equal to 1 is a bad point here. Okay. Sixth question is this, derivative of this. Again, derivative does not exist. Function itself does not exist. See, it becomes negative. 2 sine 3x minus 4 is negative. Most teachers just applied chain rule. They were all good teachers, by the way. And last one, this is again not a definite integral, because this is not continuous in this. 0 is here. So anyway, finally, I just want to mention, since I didn't have an occasion to present you in person where I can show hands-on things much, there are a few in my file here, but I want to tell you that there is this website of this person named Tadashi Tokida. Makes very, very beautiful demonstrations, very enjoyable to watch. I'm giving you 2 of this YouTube sites. Absolutely amazing ones. Please watch them, enjoy. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful collection of puzzles and problems. It was very fascinating. We have some questions, so I'll ask you one by one. So the first question is by Hridayananda Saikia. He asked this question right after you explained the Temperley-Fisher tiling problem. So he asks, is the tiling problem a boiled down version of triangulation of manifolds?
I'm just thinking, wait, I have a, not exactly, but there is something to do with it. I'm just trying to remember, because one of my colleagues, he works on this triangulations of surfaces, but who told me about this also? It has related. I think I should. Why don't you ask him to email me? I had to find out. I don't know the answer right away. There is some connection with triangulation, but not directly. Okay. So maybe it's, I think, something with the higher dimensional tiling actually. 3-dimensional tiling is related to this triangulations, although it's plain triangulation. But I don't know it right away.
Okay, sir.
So their proof, the Temperley-Fisher and all, they didn't have anything. They didn't talk about this. Any of this surfaces are triangulations.
So Kukil Raskwa is asking you to suggest some reference for tiling patterns and symmetry.
Yes, very good question. Actually, there is a very nice book by somebody named Stein, Stein. Which Stein I'm trying to remember. Okay. Anyway, he has a book called Group Theory and Tiling. Okay, it's published by the American Math Society many years back. So try to find it. If you cannot get it, you let me know. I can. Group Theory and Tiling, it's called, because it discusses many tiling problems, elementary as well as using group theory. Because it introduces group theory and so. Because I didn't discuss many problems which use group theory. Even the problem about integer size rectangles, you can use group theory, free groups, and so on. You can solve it in a jiffy like that. Okay, so that book is nice. E. Stein, Group Theory and Tiling.
So somebody has corrected saying that it is R. Stein. Is it?
Okay. Yeah, maybe E. Stein is a very famous one, so maybe the E came. So whoever it is, it could be R. Stein.
Okay.
There are many Steins.
There are several questions of this type. So most of them are asking about some how to get some basic study material on this type of puzzles, and are there any books of this kind?
Okay, what I'll do is I'll spend some time gathering together some references and perhaps share it along when I share this file with you both. Maybe I can do that. Then if it can be put up somewhere, I don't know if I can share this file at the time. Can it be put up somewhere, or they
Yes,
can see?
yes, we can put it up on our
So
website.
along with that, I'll give you I'll do some research and find out some references. Right away, I don't remember because I just gathered some together. If I spend some time, I'll be able to do it properly.
There are a few more people who asks if you could explain the magic trick, the card magic trick, which
Okay.
that you'll go back.
Okay, so let me go back. It's really amazing because now you can do it. You can impress your friends. And I myself wanted to impress like it. Because I say while we're discussing this problem, we made up this problem, but it is some of the Olympiad kids who really came up with this correct way of doing it. Where is it? I think before this. Okay, so all of you can see this page. I guess the associate who's there does the following thing. So you're outside the room. The audience has selected 5 cards, all of different numbers, and given it to her. So what does your associate do? She chooses 2 cards of the same suit first. There are only 4 suits and 5 cards, so at least 2 of them of the same suit might be there, right? So she chooses 2 of them like that, and she turns one of them face down. Okay. Now, what does she do? She arranges a face down and face up card of the same suit, that is, next to each other. Now she puts the face down card, the smaller card to the left. So, for example, the face down card to the right, it is a bigger one. Of the same suit as the face up card to the left. If the face down card is to the left, then it is a smaller one. So anyway, so what I'm saying is when you place these 5 cards, then looking at the face down card, and if it is the first card, that means what does it mean? That means it is the same suit as the second card, and it is smaller. We know that. If the face down card is the second card, that means the same suit as the first card, and it is bigger in size. These 2 things we know. Now, what else does she do? The 3 remaining cards, she puts them on the right side. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cards. So the first and second cards are same suit. One of them is face down, and the smaller card is to the left. The 3, 4, 5. How does she place them? Now, first of all, notice that 3 cards can be arranged in 6 ways, 3 factorial ways. Now, the numbers 1, 2 to 6, we can always associate to the 6 arrangements. Like you say 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. You can put all these in a certain order, which you already have an understanding with your associate. Which arrangement corresponds to 1, which corresponds to 2, which corresponds to 3, etc. Right? So if you see a card, see the 3 remaining cards, let's say it's like A, B, C. Suppose A less than B less than C. Then A less than B less than C will correspond to one of the numbers 1 to 6. A bigger than B and C less than both of them. That will correspond to one more number among 1 to 6. So each of these arrangements, so she can place it in such a way that you know when you enter the room, just by looking at those 3 cards, which number from 1 to 6 is involved. Okay, now how does that help? So you enter. You see that the face down card is either to the left, most or second from the left, as I mentioned. In both cases, you know the suite of the face down card and also know whether it is smaller or bigger, according to whether it's in the left, first or second, the face down card. Looking at the 3rd, 4th, and 5th card, she knows one of the numbers, you know one of the numbers between 1 and 6. Because this is from prior understanding between you and so associate now arranges them so that this number is precisely the distance between the face down card and the card of the same suite. See, when I arrange all the 13 cards in a circle, when you arrange in a circle, you can always go between any card is between one card and the other card distance is at the most 6. Okay, so knowing the number which is 6, suppose you get the number 11, that means that's not the order in which you go. You have to go the other way. So you had a number between 1 and 6, and you go in that direction and find that card. Because you know the face up card, you know the street of the face down card. So you know and you know the size of the number in the face up card. So from there, you add or subtract that number between 1 and 6, and you get to that card. So you can immediately say this card. Is it okay?
Thank you, sir.
Voila.
So there is a comment from Anirban. So he says that Rolf Stein, he has given a new type of pentagonal tiling in 1985. So did you mention the same Stein by any chance?
No, I think this is not Ronstein. This is not Ronstein.
So he says Rolf.
It's again R, I think, but Richard or something. He doesn't seem to be that well-known a person. Okay, among the many well-known Steins. But
So,
pentagonal tiling is very interesting. Of course, it is related to many things. Yeah, maybe one more time we'll talk about other tilings.
okay. There are again several questions of the same kind. So they are asking how to become proficient in problem solving, especially for high school students.
Okay. So start solving problems. That's what I'm saying. No, what I'm saying is, then you right away look at problems which are in the textbook or some Olympiad type or something. You cannot solve them. You just give it up. Don't do that. That's why you try to solve problems which are maybe more difficult ones. But then, if you cannot solve them, try to solve a simpler problem. That's what people have said. Try to make a simpler assumption and then try to solve. You develop your thinking ability. You may not be able to solve the original problem, but you do this. After a little while, if you have a threshold of solving some simple problems, for which I don't know there is any magic, but simple problems, you have to keep trying somehow. And once you reach a threshold, after that, you could look at certain simple books, I can tell you, where you start with easier problems and go ahead, develop your training. You know that one of the greatest sort of mathematicians in education is George Polya. His dictum was that problem solving can be taught. It's not as though you have to be born with problem solving ability. Problem solving can be taught. So in fact, he used to solve sign his name as how to solve or something. Solving and proving, something like this. Sign his name. So problem solving, basic level you can develop by looking at some challenging problems, not too challenging, but because always the answer is given, you always look at the answer. This is a problem. Anywhere people look at it, they look at. And after some threshold only, you start looking at problem solving books, puzzle books and other books. And typically what happens is this general books will have very dry kind of problems. You don't find sort of world level problems. It's like looking practical problems. So maybe there are a few books of that kind also. Of course, you had Martin Gardner. Some books, if you look at them, really still fascinating. I'll try to get some other books also. Think of.
So there is a question from my side. So we don't have any more questions. So I see that you are also very active in proposing problems, for example, in the Math Student, and also writing small articles in the American Math Society, the fillers. So how do you approach this type of activity? Like, how do you approach the activity of proposing problems?
Okay, so one should, because you should have a real passion for it, right? In fact, I should tell you a secret. I don't know whether I should speak out aloud or not, but many years back when I was in TIFR for many years, those days I had the impression, maybe I was wrong, impression that you should learn only deep mathematics and do only that. Don't waste time on this kind of elementary problem solving. So I like that. I still used to continue trying some problem on monthly, American Math Monthly and all, which is usually difficult. Once in a while I would be able to solve, but I would, even if I were able to solve, I would sort of hide it. I'll not tell it to people. And I realized that let me share it, started sharing it. I found that many people, now many more people are quoting me for some elementary fillers and so on, than so-called difficult technical paper that I write. So I think how approaching is that there is a stretch of time when I think, okay, let me try some problem. Then because of your own having spent time on it earlier, you might there are several times see some patterns and see, okay, this is like the problem I did that, and then sometimes you're able to use that idea. So by analogy, I solved many problems and made many problems also. I think analogy is one of the things that I didn't talk about here. Totally different. You non-commutative from rings. I have analogy using adding numbers and multiplying numbers, which is totally wrong. But the end result is something you get which makes meaning. In other words, you write something like numbers and get a beautiful formula and erase all the lines in between. The last formula makes sense. So analogy is very useful.
Thank you, sir, for the valuable.
It was a great pleasure for me, and then I should thank you again. Maybe another occasion I'll again talk.
Yes, definitely, sir.
Thank you for being patient, and maybe I'll share this file after a little while. I'll make little changes and also add some references and think of what other questions people might have and add it and send it.
So if Devasis wants to say something before.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation, and it was wonderful. And you have shown us several problems from very random things like paper folding and all. It was it was quite nice, and we'll definitely go through your slides. Maybe you can share the slides with us, and Manjil will post it in the website, and the participants can have a look. And the problems were really interesting and motivating for every one of us. So thanks a lot, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to also say that I want to mention Gunit Sara is doing a great job, and Manjil has been doing this. That's how I first corresponded with Manjil earlier. I remember got some problem. And please go keep on doing it. All the best.
Yeah.
Thank
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll go out now.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So for the participants, we have already